I'm noticing a growing openness to the Web3 space.
Also, what I think changes in the conversation with the Web3 technology, it is now also the humility of it is just a tool that is useful for the solution of the bigger problem.
Welcome to The Regeneration Will Be Funded. This is a show about regenerative finance. We are here exploring pathways to a life-affirming economy. I'm your host, Matthew Monahan, and today's guest, and we're doing something a bit different, is my friend Hoke Brammer. He is the lead at Hypercerts Foundation, brand ambassador at Cafe and Croissant, and we are here to have a conversation at the end of New York Climate Week, but we're going to publish this first after over a dozen amazing interviews that have been recorded over the last 5 days here in New York City. I invited Hoke on just to, have a bit of a chat, maybe less of an interview, but a chance to synthesize some of our thoughts and reflections and share a bit of what's happening in the Ma-Earth grants round coming up. Some ideas cooking around EcoCerts, and we'll see where the conversation goes. So thanks for sitting down and doing this, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And excited to also hear your thoughts on and takeaways from Climate Week.
Great. So you first. How was your week?
Wonderful. I mean, it's always good to catch up with old friends and get to know new people that are just doing amazing work. And there are lots of those. And then also just like seeing the huge variety of events that happen, from kind of the events that are kind of like a panel at a law firm where it's more like kind of almost like a top-down view on impact measurement and how do we create the right incentives, to more really like a kind of the bottom-up perspectives, and including not only the usual bottom-up approaches, but also then tapping into what are the roles of activists and what are the roles of more like the projects on the ground, and how can we actually connect multiple stakeholders and kind of go forward to what we want to achieve together.
Yeah. I mean, people say Climate Week is like Burning Man for climate geeks, and it's been several years since I've done a Burning Man, but it does remind me of that, because everyone's having a different experience. Like there's a lot of people here. I don't know actually how many people are in New York right now for Climate Week, but which tracks and which events you go to fundamentally defines your experience. I mean, you can say, oh, this whole week was corporate greenwashing and, UN General Assembly politicking and chaos and traffic, or you say, oh, I had the best late night parties and hung out with a bunch of old friends and, artists and musicians. And so there's a different kaleidoscope of experiences people are having here. It's hard to generalize one Climate Week the same way you might a conference or shared experience.
Yeah, fully agreed. And to some extent, that also makes it special, because you make your own journey, and then you connect with others who have actually a different experience. But on the way you cross the path also with those who have the different experiences. And then just during Climate Week, you actually talk about Climate Week and what were their highlights. And so you get like multiple perspectives on Climate Week when you're actually here.
Yeah. One thing I've heard repeated many times, I've seen it in my LinkedIn feed, I heard it from a lot of the folks we interviewed, is that it's really becoming Climate and Nature Week. And this kind of framing, which I still find kind of funny, to be honest. I've my understanding of the English language as a human being is like nature is everything, and that you don't like put nature over here and climate over there. But it's become the nomenclature for, climate being carbon, global warming, climate change, and then nature being habitat, biodiversity, kind of all these other Earth systems. And it's really, the movement seems to be trying to, really put momentum and grow the importance of the biodiversity conversation and the habitat loss conversation, so that we're not just in carbon tunnel vision. And it seems people are feeling like that's becoming stronger and stronger of an understanding.
Yeah, I agree that first of all, I think it's a limitation of our language and how we capture things like climate and nature and how we really speak about it. But at the same time, it shows actually that we are broadening the perspective, and I think that is kind of a good tendency and a good direction that we go in. So I think the conversation and how we describe our relationship with or in nature, because we are obviously part of it as well, that is something that we also continuously have to question and get also like different perspectives on that and develop that further. So I think in that way, this observation is good, but it's only one step on kind of how do we put words and terms to what we really want to do and how we are how we are in the world and how we discuss, how we design and shape the world around us.
Yeah. What were some of your favorite events that you went to?
I think I mentioned it earlier already. Like it was like 2 events back to back. Where first I was at a panel with kind of the land banking group with Regen Network and Terrasos, talking about how do we measure impact, how do we build incentive systems, and then from there I directly went into an event at a church, the Nature Temple, and there was a panel of activists talking about like what's really going wrong and how can we really put voices to that, and kind of also like a little bit the contrast about those 2 events. Even though like the first one was like not kind of the corporate greenwashing, it was like really people who really want to change something and also have like a bottom up perspective and all of that. But there is still a quite a different a different vibe to those conversations, and I think it's also important to really take in the different vibes and calibrate yourself how you act as a person in that space.
Yeah.
What were some of your favorite events, or were you just doing interviews?
I mean, I did mostly interviews. I mean, and shout out to the team, Jeff and Dave, who have been just absolutely heroes and being on this journey with me. We did, well over a dozen conversations in the space here. I mean, I'm highly biased, but the Ma Earth Mixer last night was probably my favorite. It's kind of our first Ma Earth event, I think, and also kind of our 1-year birthday party anniversary. We launched right kind of on the cusp of Climate Week last year. We launched our first, like collection of interviews that we had been recording in the previous months, and so it's been a trip around the sun and really cool to see. And the event was really cool. Yael and Sophia and others kind of held down a really beautiful vision of having something that was different than the other kind of more corporate or more office-y spaces. And so we did it at the Psychedelic Assembly here in New York City. It's at a library, so it's just kind of a funky down-tempo vibe. Really nice lighting, and we had Ambrosia come in and bring non-alcoholic nourishing elixirs, and we had some massage chairs that just kind of giving people little back rubs. And I mean, it was just a nice way to wind down, because the experience was last year as well. By the end of the week, everyone is so tired and so exhausted and so oversaturated and drained. And
so maybe you can share a little bit more. So it was like intentionally different, the event.
Yeah.
And so like where did that intentionally come from? Like why this type of event? And maybe also you compared it earlier to Burning Man, but we are in New York City, so there's quite a different environment. So how do you connect those things?
I don't have a super well formulated view on it, but I have definitely noticed when we ask people, either when they come into the space for an interview or on camera, like, how was your Climate Week? How's it going? And 99% of it is like, I'm tired, and it's like it's so overstimulating, and it's great. It's like there is a feeling that there's positive aspects to what's happening, but it does call into question, like, okay, so what is that vibe that we're creating? What is that culture that we're creating? Like, can we source, the right sets of change and solutions and response to these ecological climate crisis that we're in, um, from that space of a concrete jungle, burnt out, right? Or is this also part of the, culture reflecting back to us of what we have to change? Bayo Akomolafe's, popular reframe of like our response to the crisis is part of the crisis, right? Like how we're responding is part of what we have to change. And I think I don't feel like it's either or. I think there's a time for sprints. There's a time for, some late nights and some early mornings and some extra coffees. And like, I don't feel like that's all bad. And if we come do this once a year, once every couple years, whatever, as a community, and New York is a city, and there's international airports, and it's like just convenient and practical given the global context. Um, I think it can be useful, and we definitely are going to need to cultivate the other spaces. I had a chat with Gregory Landaway last night, and that was his reflection of like, the importance of, okay, well, where are the other spaces where we're convening and meeting in more of a, less performative, more authentic, um, yeah, like the shoulders can drop down, have more spaciousness in the schedule, more circle work, more of a human to human type of connection. Um, and yeah, I don't necessarily like aspire to host and convene lots of events, but I am feeling like, oh gosh, like who's stepping up to do that? Because it does feel like an important part of the medicine of the moment.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think this relates to one of my like favorite quotes from Climate Week. Was by Austin Wade Smith, who, and I might take it a little bit out of context, but he said like sometimes you have to be urgently patient, and I just like love that combination of words. And it really is like some things just take time, and especially when we want to put things into the right relationships and building relationships and acting from that side of us as humans,
right?
Then that is not something that can be rushed. So, and for those things, we have to take time. And then I fully agree that some other things we actually can like push and have to go faster, but we have to be careful that we don't rush the things that can't be rushed.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm going to spend some more time reflecting on it. I don't know exactly, like in this moment, I'm not going to COP16. A lot of folks are going, to COP16, the Biodiversity Summit. Just kind of my personal journey where I'm at right now. It's kind of more of a time to reflect and tend to other things in my life, and so yeah, it's but I'm relieved I'm not. This was a lot of energy. So anyway, any other thoughts about Climate Week overall?
I mean, in total, it was just great fun, and it's also just spending time with, like, I mean, with you and other collaborators. So also Hans, who now joined My Earth, and really spending quality time with people that you want to like bring change to, and like do your contribution to the things. And that quality time in the midst of all the activities is just, yeah, it's so valuable, and I'm grateful for the time that we had in that group.
Yeah, quite a privilege to see and connect with so many folks. Yeah. Okay, well, we had also a number of interviews, which was, there were a few common themes that were emerging. I thought would be good to chat about, and we did cover a lot around finance, tech, climate, nature related themes and how they weave together. And so, once again, this is just like kind of a narrow lens into a very wide spectrum of conversations that are happening here, and we're particularly following our nose and kind of formulating ideas and understandings of trying to look at the machinery and the plumbing that can connect capital to place-based regenerative projects, right? And like, what are all the different challenges in that stack, and how do we kind of look at the incentive structures of money and finance, and how these things are going to change with Web3 and with new tooling, like what's happening from space. We had a great quick chat with Will Marshall, who is the CEO of Planet Labs. He was talking about their new forest carbon monitoring product and launches that happened here. A lot of companies and projects use Climate Week to make announcements and to launch new features and products. We had a great conversation with Tom Crowther. That was a super fun one. Tom's just an amazing science communicator, and kind of what Crowther Lab has incubated across, seed and the biodiversity measurements that they do, and kind of the robust science to show, what's emerging, analysis of different limits, where as we extract more from intact forests and ecosystems, that agricultural yields are actually going down, because the amount of pollinators and wildlife and the corridors and everything else are degrading to such an extent that more land doesn't mean more land. So that was really fascinating. And then of course they have Restore.eco, which is kind of a leading tool in the field around showcasing. It's kind of like Google Maps for restoration projects, and they launched Restore Enterprise. So that was a really fun conversation. I really enjoyed Jojo Mehta from Stop Ecocide. Once again, I met her last year at Climate Week, and I think Stop Ecocide is still like underrated in its potential impact. And kind of they're running a lean, tight organization. They've only spent pretty modest amount of funds over the lifetime of their group, but they now have in the International Criminal Court the proposal with the agreed upon definition of ecocide that has been formulated by this kind of global grassroots convening processes that they've been a part of. And that will make it in the highest, it would be the fifth law in the International Criminal Court, which kind of ripples out, is the most prominent criminal court system that we have as a global collective, that it will make it a criminal act for known and wanton destruction of large landscapes, habitat. And that's so important because it creates a legal foundation for other environmental laws, but also kind of creates a level playing field and a safety net for boardrooms to government councils and everyone else to know that everyone's playing by the same rules. You can't destroy nature willfully in that way. And yeah, it's just been interesting to watch the execution of that organization. They're doing really good work. So I wanted to give them a shout out. Yeah. Any reflections on all of that?
I mean, I had the privilege to meet some of the interviewees that you had this week briefly, and also just the energy they every one of them brings to the interview. And so it's really cool to see, and also just to see the very different perspectives that you get on the show here. So that's fantastic. And yeah, I was wondering if you have something that you heard in the interviews that stuck with you, that you're oh, that is something new, surprising, or something where you say that this is something that I want to think about more in the next couple of weeks, or an inspiration that you took from that?
I mean, I'm noticing, and part of it is how we position the channel in our interviews, but part of it, I think, is a growing openness to the Web3 space as holding some important pieces of the puzzle for how we move forward. And so more comments about I really want to go deeper into understanding how Web3 can be used for this, or really, maybe it's Web3 that can do that, or how blockchain can do that. And that's encouraging. And it also is it's kind of a call to action of okay, so how are we really distilling down the synthesis of our learnings in the crypto, blockchain, Web3 space, of where we're all at, how these things can be applied to these emerging, fields of natural capital, regenerative finance, ways to connect capital into climate and nature and biodiversity and so forth. So, yeah, I'm feeling the call and the invitation to really try to get some better distillations, and excited to be at DevCon in November, which is an Ethereum event, another large conference event. But a lot of the leaders in the field will be there, and so we'll try our best to get some microphones out and so forth. But yeah, that's one. I think Gmo from Sylvie, really just kind of hit me with a gut punch around 15 billion trees that we're losing per year, and we're only replanting 2 billion. And of those two, we're kind of only doing an okay job of like picking the right trees or kind of creating native diverse habitat. And we've lost 3 trillion and we need to restore like 1 trillion. So like, we're at a negative 13 billion a year right now, and we need to get to like 1 trillion. The scale of the problem is just kind of staggering, and when you kind of look at it like that, it's just, this is not an incremental response ahead, right? And I appreciated that most of the interviews, I just felt like a lot of humility. Like no one's saying like we have the solution or we know how this is done. There's no grandstanding, generally speaking, that like, oh, this is the silver bullet. It's like, we got a lot of work ahead. This is my little piece of the puzzle that I'm trying to kind of get tighter and better, and I'm hoping that everyone else can do their piece.
Yeah, and I think this is to some extent exactly also what I think changes in the conversation with the Web3 technology, that it is now also the humility of it is just a tool that is useful for the solution of the bigger problem. And so in that way, it's not that, oh, this is kind of the work that has been done for decades, and now suddenly people come in and say, we have the solution, which I think is how it seemed at the beginning. But now we actually like recognize that it also is just one piece, and it can be a powerful piece, but that on both sides, the openness is more there to engage and to really work together to bring the solutions that we have worked on for a long time and connect them with new like digital infrastructure that we have now that we didn't have before.
Yeah, one other theme that came through was around interoperability, and we talked to the folks at Explorer.land. We're talking to folks like Gmo around Sylvie and these tools. I think everyone's recognizing the importance of making them interoperable, and we're at this early stage of development in many ways, and so all the more opportunity and importance that we place on how do we create interoperability, and not just interoperability and like, oh yeah, well we document our thing and you can come consume our API, but like no, like a real intentional like, how do we understand what you're doing in terms of your data standards and taxonomies, and how your system's working and how our system, and how are they going to actually fit together? And I think that the why here in many ways is not just so that we can all move faster and have a higher velocity and so forth, but like when we're talking about bringing land projects into digital ecosystems and environments and saying, put all these information in about your coordinates and, tracking your impact and kind of the measurements and everything else, we don't want them to be burdened with doing that 15 times across 15 different applications and tools, right? Like we need to take protocol standards approaches in service to the end users to make it easy and seamless. Yeah. And so I got the sense that everyone's on that same page that I talked to in and out of the interviews, and that there's also still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and the other piece of that is that land projects shouldn't be locked into just one platform, right? So they should get onboarded. They should have the access to the funding that they need to do their work, and then they need to really decide also on the ground like what are the right things to do. But then the digital tools shouldn't be a burden, and it shouldn't be you have to decide between this and that. It's more you get onboarded to it, and you have the multiple instruments available, and you can choose which ones are really the best ones for you. And maybe that changes over time. So that's why this interoperability is really a key piece that we have to give the land projects so that they can really do their best work.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to make sense, and it's a half-baked, just like thought, but almost more working groups around this, some sort of loosely held. I know there's a lot in the technology space overall already, but specific to these kind of new taxonomies around land stewards and land projects, I think that there's probably still some gap. And yeah, it'd just be good to make sure that the leaders within these organizations are all talking and actually doing the work together.
Yeah, and there's something about like, how do we organize land projects such that the common needs, the things that bother all of them at the same time, that they really emerge as problems that need to be solved, that we are not just like in some like tech engineering bubble where we think, oh, these are the problems that are on the ground. But if we are able to bring 50 land projects together that discuss, oh, these are the tools that we are using and these are the things that are challenging to us, how can we really distill that and bring that to those who really can build the technology that solves those concrete problems. So I think that is like a function that such a group can play very well, and bringing those together, I think is like something that already happens. For example, with the first MaRearth grants round, and building on top of that, and then seeing how they can support each other and how then we can leverage other resources to help the group as a whole. Right. I think that can be something very powerful that we have, that I've done in Germany with Project Together, where we called kind of the methodology open social innovation. And it really is about like coordinating bottom-up projects and then answering to the needs, and doing that also with the connection to potentially some of the top-down institutions who hold the keys to their problems. But every single small project doesn't have the access or the time or the resources to solve that directly. So that's why the organization and kind of the bundling of multiple projects is something that is very powerful in the space.
Do you have any like kind of first principles that you learned from that experience of how you think about, how to create that cohesiveness of the constituents and then link that information into the funders?
So there's something really funny that we observed is when you really give people the opportunity to meet each other really on the eye level. So we brought in, and this was during the pandemic, so a lot just happened on Zoom, but it was having projects then talk to people in ministries where they seem to be kind of a very like different perspective on things, but they perceive themselves suddenly more as like, oh, we actually like work on the same problem. Right. We want to solve it together. Right. And if you are able to create that atmosphere in a working group, where it doesn't actually matter that there are some people who decide how funds are allocated, and there are some people who work on land and do the work. And there's actually not that big of a difference because we really are in it for the same thing. Then that creates kind of the productive environment in such a working group that unlocks like all the kind of practicalities that we normally talk about in the first place. So, and if you create that atmosphere, almost everything is possible in that.
And do you think that's mostly in-person atmosphere, or do you think it can also be done virtually?
We have successfully done it virtually, but yes, in person it's always easier if you spend really quality time with people. But yeah, so I think it's sometimes a necessity to do it online, and especially when you then try to find out what are the common problems of different projects in different areas of the world that can be answered. Then I think sometimes it's just like necessary, and it can be done, but it needs to be very intentional in that way as well. So it's not just jumping on a Zoom call, defining the problem, finding the solution. It's also like in that way, building the relationships, building the trust, and then coming up with the solutions that can be implemented together.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, you mentioned the grants round. We are just about to launch grants round 2. MaRearth Grants Round 2. Woohoo! Very excited. yeah, when people are watching this, the application will either be live or just about to go live. Everything up to date is at maearth.com/grants. Essentially, we ran Grants Round 1 earlier this year. I think it was April or May. It was on Gitcoin, quadratic funding round, where we put up a matching pool of $100,000 and distributed that across 23 land projects on the basis of how much they raised from their communities, but also how many contributors. So that's the quadratic part. And this is a popular, emerging kind of tool and pattern in the Web3 space, still fairly new to everyone else. And yeah, we're learning a lot. Hypercerts, the project that you've been stewarding, is been a group that has been the recipient of different Web3 grants programs. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, happy to. And it's actually, we have been on both sides. So I have run Gitcoin rounds for Protocol Labs as well as for the Hypercerts Foundation. But then, as you mentioned, we also have been projects on Gitcoin as like a recipient of funds, similar to the platform Octant, that also is a emerging Web3 public goods funding mechanism, as well as Optimism Retro PGF. And through all of these, they really are in it also for experimenting how we can find new innovative ways to allocate funds. And it is a challenge because there are like so many different things you can tap into the different mechanisms. But for us, it was like the way to really diversify our funding sources, which also gives us a little bit of like more security because we are not dependent just on one funding source, one mechanism. So, and then the crowdfunding from Gitcoin, we successfully raised some funds there. Then the retrospective aspect from Optimism, that is, and that was, those rounds are quite large. So I think they give multiple tens of millions in retrospective funding, which is amazing and really gave us the opportunity to have a longer horizon of how we build. And then Octant has maybe like every year, like 3 or 4 rounds, epochs, as they call them. And that also brings like returning funds. So you have to update, like, what are you up to? What have you done with the funds? But there is some kind of a continuity of the funds coming in. And I think nobody has really figured that out perfectly yet. But that is, I think, the thing that is the biggest challenge. And it is also continuously like a challenge for us. How do we build this in a way where we don't just go in a for-profit way? How can we keep really this mission and in a non-profit way, but have the continuous sustainable funding sources? So, and this is, I think, the key challenge. And that is a challenge, I think, that we still have to figure out. But all of these projects and funding platforms try to go into that direction with like kind of minimizing the burden on the projects, but still creating some accountability that the projects actually use the funds that they get in order to build something in the public interest for really what the money was intended to.
I think we have asked a number of guests on the show about the shortcomings of the venture model, including, we had this week Tom Quigley from Superorganism, kind of the first biodiversity-focused venture fund. And, venture has a place in the ecosystem, but there's just so many perverse incentives it can create downstream once companies are successful, because there's so much pressure to kind of earn these disproportionate outsized returns, since a lot of companies being funded by venture fail. That's how the model works. And it's still in this like kind of endless growth paradigm where it's like, well, then you've got to exit or you got to IPO, but then you got to keep growing. There's no end. It just keep growing forever. And so much of that to me is like the first 1 to 3 years of a startup's life. And so this ability for the Web3 grants to extend the runway for projects and founders to kind of find their way and figure out what's the right capital structure and the right incentives and product market fit or whatever, like, could end up being such a gift to the technology ecosystem. I bootstrapped, our startup, my brother and I, for years before we raised venture money, and that made all the difference because we were able to kind of right size the venture relative to where we were at the stage, and it was just kind of an incredibly good luck that we were able to do that. But so yeah, that's one thing I love about what's emerging here. But then also just the programmability of money is just enabling all these new experiments, and Gitcoin and some of the groups you've mentioned and like Optimism are really pushing the edges of like what does it mean to allocate capital and how do we build these like new global brains that are essentially, more intelligent using peer-to-peer democracy, community allocation, thinking forward, thinking backward, creating new markets, making these things, pluggable APIs that can kind of fit into different streams, real time, monthly, quarterly, and there's all sorts of problems, and there's Iwaki, founder of Gitcoin, just put out a post about Web3 funding fatigue, identifying some of the shortcomings after what's Gitcoin on now, 22 rounds. So yeah, I think it's an exciting space, but it can be overwhelming from the outside. What we're trying to do with Ma Earth is really focus on those land projects again and say, okay, the thing we keep hearing from them is that they need funding, and so we're like, okay, how do we help you? Like funding, like, well, what about this funding? Like they need funding. So then you talk to the funders, and there's all sorts of problems of how they're trying to figure out how to invest their capital and their grant funds in a way that there's confidence and trust in the impact it's having, and that it's getting into the right hands in place. And so I think that the infrastructure and the plumbing here is really exciting. And that's the space we're seeking to play in is Ma Earth, and with the second grants round. So the second grants round for us is going to be, we're going to select 30 projects, so a little bit more than the first round. And the reason we're limiting it, even though we expect a lot more applicants, is we want to, one, hold a really high quality bar, and two, still be in relationship with the projects best we can. We expanded our team a bit. We have a new team member, Sophia, who came on as kind of community tender. She's going to be, adding more support in terms of how we do profiling and storytelling and just trying to stay close on the ground of what are people's experiences. But also because the matching pool is only so large, we want to make it really worthwhile to participate in this because it's a lot of effort. Like, what have you experienced in terms of these rounds? Like, do you have this kind of fatigue, and does it feel like, oh my gosh, another round? And how do you even measure the ROI of getting involved in another one?
Yeah, I think there is the interesting aspect of if you're in the space and you have like multiple applications, and then there are multiple funding rounds where there are matching funds available, and then you not only put out your application, but you also try to get out the word that people who support your projects actually add some donations so that it unlocks more matching funds. But then you are suddenly like in 3 different funding rounds where people can add funds in order to unlock matching funds. And there's not only the fatigue on the project side, but also fatigue on the funder side from the retail funders who just like give maybe like $20 here or $50 there. And if every time you like ask them again, it's like, can you please add like a little bit here, and like even like at the same time in multiple matching funds, that's like a challenge. So, and while the distribution mechanism will be distributed according to the community sentiment is like an amazing approach, it has to be balanced with how do we actually surface the kind of the intention and what the community really believes are the most impactful projects. Mm-hmm. So there needs to be kind of like a balance of like, how do we do that in the right way where we don't overburden also the community with the input. And I think for that we kind of need to figure out the right tools. Where it was only like Gitcoin doing these rounds, it kind of worked, but like as we get more and more different projects, then we also have to think, okay, what is actually the experience for somebody just supporting 2 or 3 projects across all of these different mechanisms. So there's also kind of the sector view perspective on the mechanisms, and then really tapping into kind of the interoperability that we talked about earlier, that how do you create kind of how do you lower the burden also for projects? For example, if you have like a project profile that is interoperable between platforms, how can you have the accountability for your funds and your milestones and what you actually did? And they're actually like also emerging solutions for that. There's like the MetaGov and others are working on DAO IP5 standards for projects. And then there's Karma Gap, where like a platform that tries to bundle kind of, okay, these are the projects that raised funds from different platforms. These are their milestones, and kind of like having a more cohesive, simplified experience across the different funding platforms. And I think there's like a lot of interesting stuff happening that also kind of now when we talk about land projects, that we can tap into the same tools and methodologies that are used for funding open source software and other public goods. So it's nice to see the different problems in different sectors kind of emerging, but there's like similar solutions that we can try out and then figure out what are the best solutions for this problem.
Yeah. I mean, I think, crypto is largely defined by the use cases of money, and money to fund open source or to fund land projects or to fund, AI safety research. Like, the common denominator of money and funding, like, it makes sense that we would start to use common crypto tools in these experiments. I do have the hunch that if we fast forward 3 or 4 years from now, like the experiences are going to be pretty radically different in these different communities of the types of applications and use case experiences that people get. Maybe not. I mean, you go to Patreon or GoFundMe, and like there's a lot in that one kind of set of patterns and containers. But I just think about, like, we're asking our land projects as one of their first questions on the Gitcoin application for their GitHub repository.
Yeah.
It's like, and there's no default question about like your coordinates of your project.
Yes.
Right. Like, and so, our experience, should be a map and appending information and data available to that map, not checking your GitHub repository. And then it just keeps going from there in terms of all the different types of feature sets that can be built. And I also think like Web3 still sucks at user experience. I'm just going to say it. Like, I mean, it's just
100%.
so bad still. And it's not to point fingers at anyone, but it's just the reality of the situation. And so that's what we saw with the first grants round. Like, onboarding land projects was, we did our best, created tutorials, we held hands, we, had Zoom calls, but getting money from fiat to crypto is hard. All the blocks that are happening in the banks. Like, I was doing tutorial videos and I typed in my credit card and it was denied. And I'm like, I'm Coinbase. And like, if I can't do it for a tutorial video, how am I expecting someone that's watching? We're seeing rapid improvement. This is how the internet was in the early days. Like, remember what it was like to do a dial-up modem, 28K, and download Napster files and all this kind of stuff. So you have to have a little bit of foresight to see that these things are getting better and better. I mean, Ethereum transactions a few years ago, sometimes gas fees were like $50, $100 for a single transaction on the blockchain. Now it's like, half of a cent or less. So radical improvements that we've made to some of the fundamental building blocks. And now it's time to get the UX interface layers tighter. We will not be there ready for prime time in Mahr's Grants Round 2. We are still kind of skinning Gitcoin's experience, if you will, or kind of using Gitcoin to do a lot of the experience. And so Gitcoin's amazing. They're holding a lot of the pieces together right now. But it's on us, I think, as product and technology developers to start to, really make this more accessible for our respective use cases.
Yeah, I think we see now the progress, and it really feels like we are really getting ready for that. And at the same time, I think with land projects, it's like almost like the toughest use case and user, that if we really push it and make it possible for them to use these tools, then it will also be like it unlocks like so many others as well, because this is kind of the piece where really the real world impact meets kind of the funding mechanisms that kind of seem a little bit abstract in the Web3 space.
Yeah, totally. Well, with that all as a caveat, I'd like to shill the grants round too. If you're a land project, make sure to apply, and if you're a donor, make sure to donate. The first round we ran, the land projects got an average of $10,000 was the mean received, and that was really helpful for a lot of them. And we saw specific use cases emerging of how those funds were being deployed. But for any sort of institutional funder, foundation, larger scale philanthropic group that's watching this, I would say we're not suggesting that this is ready for prime time. If you want to contribute to the matching pool, we would, of course, warmly receive the funds and make sure that 100% of them get distributed out to these land projects. And I, stand by our process of curation and the quality bar and the panelists that are going to be a part of this in selecting, really worthy projects. But at the same time, like, we do recognize that this is still early days, and so I would encourage more of like set up a wallet and contribute $100, $200 to some of your favorite groups and start going through the experience with us and start to kind of learn with us about how are these funding mechanisms going to be able to continue to scale. Quadratic funding just being one of many different types of allocation mechanisms over time. We are putting $150,000 up in the matching pool. So that's coming from Biome Trust, a philanthropic organization based in New Zealand, but with a global footprint. And essentially, we're going to make sure that that capital is there and kind of creates enough substantive, incentive for this whole thing to happen. We'll have tutorials on the website. So if you're new to Web3, we'll do our best to show you how to set up wallets, how to transfer to layer 2s, how to put the funds through Gitcoin, et cetera. Again, recognizing all those aspects of the experience are still being kind of improved in real time. And this time next year, hopefully will look quite different. And there's another round happening on Gitcoin. So the rounds will be happening starting October 23rd and ending through November 7th. And it's all part of Gitcoin Grants Round 22. And so Gitcoin runs their big rounds, and then we're kind of running a community round alongside that, or maybe, I don't know if we're at an official community round yet, but like it's going to be another round happening at the same time. There's an additional one that's a friend of the show, which is the BioFi community led by Samantha Power and team, and they're doing their first round specifically for bioregional financing facilities. I think matching pool, last I checked, was up to 40K or something, and there's still more fundraising happening there. And essentially that's kind of a first experiment with this BFF model of bringing capital into these bioregional activators and these financing facilities that then will be able to pool capital and then move it into the projects in their area. So it's a nice complement. We're more focused on projects that are actually in direct relationship with a piece of land, and BFFs and BioFi will be more at the aggregation level at a bioregional scale. And Ma Earth is contributing to that round in the matching pool as well, because we really just see it as like the more the merrier right now. Like, let's run lots of experiments. Let's do a lot of this work together. Let's get more place-based regenerative finance kind of vibes going inside the Gitcoin community and just kind of cross-pollinate and see what we all build together.
Yeah, nice. So it's basically land projects should apply, and they can apply soon, I believe.
Yes.
Then when the round starts, then anybody can donate any amount, like small amounts matter as well because they unlock the matching funds. So that starts October 23rd.
That's right.
And then the third one, the potential matching funders, if there are others who want to contribute bigger amounts, then they can get in contact and let's first have a conversation if it really makes sense at this point, or if they want to contribute to other experiments that we will be running in this space. And so basically three different groups that can take action here, and it basically includes everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for that. Okay. And the things we learned when we were, in relationship with those land projects in the first round is a lot of folks used the funds for some additional tree planting, for example. It's a nice expense, kind of $5,000 to $15,000 can kind of enable and unlock, some new hedgerows and some new corridors and some new infrastructure around tree planting, and maybe not part of your day-to-day operational expenses that you have covered. Not something that involves like hiring a person and needing ongoing funds, because these are just one-time funds and one-time grants. So it's like you can't really count on it to necessarily, bring on a new staff member for an extended period of time. But that incremental grant, kind of unlocks that. We also saw people putting in greenhouse infrastructure and kind of additional, building structures where like $5,000 to $15,000 kind of helped get it over the line or do something. And so those were a couple of the use cases amongst others. But universally, essentially there is always this question of like, well, how do we see the impact? How do we measure the impact? How do we evaluate the impact? And now as we're screening applications for round 2, it's like, show us what you did from round 1 with the funds if you're a repeating applicant. And so, yeah, I think that this is also a common theme across all sorts of funding mechanisms and all sorts of sectors, not just the land projects, but I guess is really a segue to hypercerts and proof of impact and impact attestations and certifications. And so, yeah, tell us more. What have you been working on with hypercerts?
Yeah. So what we really try to do is stepping one level further down from all the discussions on different types of credits and the direct impact, and really come to the layer of the kind of a certificate of work. So first we want to understand who did what when. So just like these 3 basic information types that we want to capture, and that's what we capture in a hypercert, or if we apply it to kind of the ecological impact, now we speak of ecocerts. So if we go that level deeper, then we also see that like all the activities that you described, this is first of all that we want to know. We want to know what did people do with the funds that they received. So, and as a first layer, that is helpful because then we can layer on top of that different types of evaluations. So we have multidimensional impact, if that is on soil health, if that is on the water that the land holds, that's on biodiversity or on carbon. So there's like multiple different types of impact, and there are also like very different types of impact if you have an educational project. And it's like, oh, like you didn't directly increase soil health, but you actually did something very valuable as well. So going one level deeper allows for like seeing a bigger picture of like what is actually the work that happens on the ground. And that's where we position hypercerts, which makes it different from all the discussions around the different types of credits, or also now I heard from Terrasos that they call them biodiversity units instead of credits. And then we kind of can make them that compatible still with the credits because they are kind of an evaluation then. And then, yes, we can also simplify it into units and credits and give the funders who funded that type of work the right to claim that impact and to put it kind of there on the nature balance sheet, which is also a term that has been used quite a bit here at Climate Week. And so this is a different type of infrastructure that we believe can serve kind of the interoperability needs between a lot of the different funding platforms, so that we not only build a new funding silo where we say, okay, now there's like a new platform where you can like describe your projects and reach out to funders. It's more that we want EcoCerts to be integrated into multiple different platforms. If you raise funds on Gitcoin or if you have a project on Restore, it's basically the underlying database where the funds go into and where we can attach the evaluations, that is kind of the same. And that is really kind of the promise of the Web3 infrastructure, that we don't have the focus on this is the platform for doing something and you have a platform lock-in, but you have the interoperability such that we also kind of have a little bit less of a kind of the take rate of the platforms and more of the funds actually reach the on-the-ground projects that do the work.
Right. So it's essentially like a proof of work certificate, and you're kind of emphasizing this protocol approach where it can fit within lots of different applications. I'd love to go deeper on kind of EcoCerts and some of the implications of all this, but for those who aren't familiar, what's the history of HyperCerts and how's the project evolved to where it is today?
Yeah, the project really started at Protocol Labs. So it came out of research from a former colleague of mine at Protocol Labs, who David had put out some research and talked about it at Funding the Commons, a conference series that also hosts Earth Commons. Highly recommended to get more the perspective and the links between Web3 and the technology space and kind of the nature regeneration space. And so at Funding the Commons, he just put out the research, and then that was the time when I joined Protocol Labs as a research scientist for public goods funding, and I picked up his ideas and thought about okay, what kind of research can I do on this idea of impact certificates, and basically made the statement that, well, we actually don't need more research. We just have to test it out and bring it to the world and see how people actually interact with it. And at an organization that's Protocol Labs, they're just okay, cool. Can you do that? Let's go. And suddenly I was not really a research scientist anymore, but then owned that project and had the really comfortable place at Protocol Labs to really develop the first prototypes and bring it out into the world. Have the first pilots with Gitcoin, where we integrated HyperCerts into the Gitcoin experience, just as a really simple test where projects that raised funds through Gitcoin afterwards were asked to create a HyperCert for their work and then distribute that HyperCert to the funders that funded them through Gitcoin. So our first pilot was already kind of an integration, also to show that this is the kind of the idea behind the technology that we develop. And then because it's something that shouldn't just live inside of Protocol Labs, we founded the HyperCerts Foundation and tried then to kind of work with different platforms to understand how can we position HyperCerts, what kind of infrastructure is necessary. We did a couple more pilots, especially with Zuzalu, the pop-up city that happened in Montenegro. And there we applied kind of retroactive funding through HyperCerts. So contributors to the event, where event can also be seen as a common good, as a public good, where the contributors that were not financially rewarded for their work, they created HyperCerts describing what they did, and funders, who mostly were just people from the community, then funded them and rewarded and recognized. So it's not only about the financial rewards, but also about the recognition of the contribution of the people. So we did a couple of experiments there, and then in the last months, what we really did was doubling down on the infrastructure. How do we link the HyperCerts, how you can create HyperCerts, how you can buy and sell HyperCerts, and how you can then also link this with the evaluations. So where the evaluations, we use the Ethereum Attestation Service, EAS, where this is also just using the modular pieces that are already out there and try to build this in a way that other projects also can pick it up. If somebody has a funding platform and wants to integrate this technology, that's possible. Or if somebody wants to build a new funding platform, if that is a price competition, an impact market, or some other form of distribution mechanism. And this is also like a feature of it, that it's not just for kind of creating impact markets, because that is a funding allocation mechanism that is useful for some types of problems, but not the one that like should rule it all. And this primitive of a hypercert should be applicable to different ways of distributing funds. And in that way, also, like if somebody out there wants to really build a funding platform and integrate hypercerts, please reach out to me and we can have that conversation, because the idea is really to build this interoperable layer below the funding platforms and have multiple experiences from the kind of the projects and the funders, and connecting them in unique ways across a network of like a network of funding platforms, and we sometimes call it a dynamic funding network instead of like having funding silos. And that is kind of the vision that that connects not only the funders and the projects, but also in a transparent way the evaluators with that, so that you have a full picture of what is actually happening and where do the funds actually are most effective, and where can we double down on the impact. And then the last piece of this, when we recognize where actual impact is happening, how can we deploy also sustainable capital to those solutions, such that we are not just in the game of like creating innovation after innovation, and like a grant there has like a good story, a good narrative, but if there's just like this boring solution that works, let's fund that, and let's fund that on a longer time horizon than just kind of this popularity innovation game that unfortunately happens too often, because it's all about like putting out the good new story.
Right. Well, there's a lot there. I mean, I think, to me, I was at David's talk at Funding the Commons. So it's been really fun to just like see the journey develop. I remember minting the hypercerts as soon as you guys went live with it, and kind of taking my Gitcoin contribution, and qualifying, and, going through the screens and kind of, I minted my first hypercert. And so I've been watching the journey, and I feel like from my vantage point, it's the kind of thing where it's very hard to explain, because we're all just kind of figuring it out, and we're putting a lot on some keywords like hypercerts or ecocerts, but it's kind of the tip of the glacier that is above the water, and in many ways it's built atop the huge ice mass underneath of blockchains and Ethereum, right? Like there's all this work that's been done on the infrastructure side, and then it's kind of a pretty thin layer, relatively speaking. Not to understate the amount of work it is, but like it is built atop this existing system. And if you don't have kind of a either a screw loose or an understanding of all of these different aspects of what's beneath the water, it's hard to necessarily kind of like immediately intuit these kind of new impact marketplaces and the transferability and kind of the evaluations and the open nature of it all, and like the fractionalization, and it's unitless but it's got units, and it's there's a lot here, and so I have a feeling that those who are enmeshed in crypto native more technical culture can maybe see a little bit more clearly what's around the horizon. But ultimately, it's going to be the kind of thing like, the proof's in the pudding when we have an actual application and a mobile, experience, and someone can be like, we just hosted a tree planting day back at the farm, and we send out invitations, we track who comes, people show up, we plant trees, we take pictures, we have a meal, some soup, and then we go home, and then people share it on Instagram. And it's like the digital devices are involved, right? Everything from the invitations to the photos to the receipts of how many trees we're laying out the maps of how are we going to plant the hedgerows, and like, and no one's questioning the kind of the extra UX steps to post it on Instagram or to send out the Facebook invite or whatever. But none of these platforms and tools were built for the tree planters. None of them were built for us trying to do ecological regeneration. The mapping was something that requires kind of special skills. The understanding where to put the trees requires unique knowledge, and like there's so much here that could be supported and assisted. And at the end, like, why didn't I get an EcoCert for my impact? It's like I can't go apply for carbon credits. I put 7 trees in the ground with 10 other, 30 other volunteers, whatever. It's like I don't get any carbon credit revenue from that. I'm not trying to go apply for a Verra methodology of avoided, deforestation, right? Like there's a gap in the market of the frontline user experience of place-based regeneration. I was at a beach cleanup, and it was the same exact thing, and it was in a different place that it was my first time there. And the woman who ran it, like at the end, she was like, "Wait! I have to take everyone's picture because I have to report back to the coordinator, her manager, how many people came, and kind of essentially create proof of impact, right?" And so we're all standing at the beach, and she's taking a picture to count how many of us were there, and so forth. And I'm like, that is going straight on the EcoCert. It's like, so I think there's something here that is interoperable with credits.
Yeah.
And the credit space is so lost. Like no one can make any sense of it. I asked the experts in the field, what do you make of carbon credits? What do you make of biodiversity credits? Where is this going? I don't know. The market's going to decide. Like, there's so many weird distortions. Net zero targets are kind of, being committed to, but then not being adhered to. Microsoft's distorting the market. Questions about the legitimacy. Okay, now we have to expand to all these other different types of credits. Now we have water credits, biodiversity credits, and these types of credits. Like, is that how this is all going to scale? Like, I don't know. There's a lot to be said about that, but I think that there's something that's interoperable that can work with those systems, and importantly, be a bridge on chain.
Yeah.
Right? Like I think you and I are of the same thesis. I don't want to speak for you, but like this transformation of the world on chain is a really big deal.
Yeah.
And like building stuff at that moment in time, it's like what a privilege, right? Like it's very exciting. And so, yeah, EcoCerts is really, I guess, a mimetic frame to HyperCerts to focus on this nature-based use case and to create some, cultural space and some UX space so that we can really start to design different types of experiences here. And what we as Mile Earth want to do is use the grants round and the land projects we're in contact with to say, hey, in order to become more legible to funders, to show your impact, to kind of, we want to work with you to go get more capital for the efforts that you're doing and to support you. And everything's a bit clumsy right now, so it's going to require some work together. But, ultimately, we would love to support in making these experiences really streamlined. We think that this protocol has real legs and has real potential. And so, I'm super excited to be collaborating with you on all of this.
Yeah. I think what you point out is really crucial, because you point out actually the user experiences of like people organizing a beach cleanup or the tree planting. And this is also something that we have heard here about the credit space, that it works potentially just for large players. Mm-hmm. And how can we also think about that? How can we think about the user experience from the projects on the ground that we actually know need to happen? Mm-hmm. And how can we then develop the tools in a very simple way? Because not everybody using it needs to understand everything in the background. Like, who can explain what HTTP is? Like, probably like less than 0.1% of everybody who uses it. So mm-hmm. we actually don't often understand all of the technology in the background. We of course have to make sure that it really does what it's supposed to do. And like some experts really need to check it. But on the user experience, it needs to be simple, and then it needs to connect these kind of like what I sometimes observe as like different logics, because like there's the bottom up logic. We know what to do. We need the funds to do it, but we are ready. And there are like so many people who do the work, but they could do much more work if they would tap into more of the funding. But the funding is kind of like stuck in a different top-down logic where I need to see like these impact metrics, and I need to this and this, and I need to incentivize kind of the people on the ground to do the right thing. It's like, no, you actually don't. You don't need to incentivize the people on the ground to do the right thing. We have to just make sure that the funds reach that. And yes, we also have the need for proper impact measurement and accountability, but it's also coming out of the need of the large funders. So the question I think that we have to answer is, what is kind of the step in between? What is kind of the interface between the bottom-up logic where we have high context, we involve a lot of stakeholders in the decision-making, we know what to do, we integrate different types of knowledge in there, and how can we then translate that with an interface and attach kind of more the top-down measurements that are necessary to tap into kind of the global funding streams that potentially just go into something like what Samantha is talking about, a bi-regional financing facility, or if it's not regional, it could also be kind of cost-based, like a fund that just funds regenerative agriculture in like lots of places. So how can we have this aggregation interface level or layer, and from there then kind of change the logic and distribute it also with the starting point of trusting the people on the ground, trusting the land project, the land stewards, the farmers and the foresters to know what is right. And then we also give them feedback from like all the measurement tools so that they can also like adopt other best practices and all of that. There's also like a feedback mechanism that is useful there.
Right.
But all of the bigger picture measurements, we mostly do that for the funding streams, and we kind of want to connect those two things. And relating that with the hypercerts, ecocerts idea is how can we have kind of a bundle of ecocerts that then can be like sold to funders, and there are like different layers of evaluations are attached to for the funders, but those measurements and incentives are not prescribing on the ground what to do.
Right. Yeah. So well said. And I think that interface layer, a lot gets said in crypto about decentralization, but in many ways, also what Web3 is, the blockchain infrastructure and architecture can do really well is disintermediation. And, that is a common critique of the carbon markets as well, is like you have $1 at the top and 10 cents goes to the bottom. It's like, where did the 90 cents go? And I think what you and I are trying to kind of hone in on is like, well, what's a really thin, efficient way through software to radically disintermediate the inefficiencies? And then importantly as well, right now, the MRV, the measuring, reporting, verification ecosystem, often doesn't have a way into the economic flows. Like as a farm, we have to go pay for soil tests from different consultants. And then we have to go pay over here to have like an ecologist come to the forest to do our biodiversity measurements. And, we're reading different websites and getting different references, and like everything's too expensive. And, it's like, that doesn't really seem like it's going to scale. It's not scaling. But what if we're getting income for our regenerative activities because our carbon sequestration in the soil and our restoration of canopy cover and our protection of the river and so forth is being recognized by these marketplaces for the impact that they're providing, those economic flows, whatever it is, 5 to 15% of it could go to the evaluation ecosystem, right? Or I don't know, I'm just making up numbers, but like that then becomes actually even a pull incentive structure where evaluators want to get involved in understanding the impact of different things, because there may be funds attached to them, and maybe not even previously, but also just in the future. It's almost like speculating on the importance of this ecological work and bringing those funds forward now, and the activity and focus forward now. Say, oh, this is a biodiversity hotspot, and so we need to go instrument this and understand this, because there's going to be more funding that's coming into this, as it's of increasing critical importance. So, yeah, I think there's just like so many different ways this can go. I certainly don't feel like I know all of the different feature sets and rabbit holes, and hence, just to kind of find an anchor, the way we're thinking about it internally at Ma Earth is like, there's more of a customer driven design process. We want to be in relationship with the land projects, in relationship with the funders, in relationship with the evaluators, and say, okay, how do we all learn together and create these heartbeats and these rhythms to kind of go through an iterative development cycle, and kind of go, okay, like, let's just do another bit and then regroup, see where we're at, and keep building that way.
Yeah. And I think this speaks to kind of the idea that the kind of the product that comes out at the end is also a reflection of how it was designed and how it was created and by whom. And so I think now the opportunity with the grants round as well, and the land projects that Ma Earth is in connection to build kind of with them the things that are necessary to make them successful. And that is also having like this pool of also like a little bit of a diverse group of land projects that are still like common enough that they have not like completely different problems, but that the solutions that come up actually work for them, and they are kind of a valuable stakeholder in the process the whole time. So I think that allows then to get to the right results, because it comes out of the right relationship in the first place.
Awesome. Well, if you're a developer and you want to come help us, we'd love to chat. That's definitely one of the roles that we're going to be continuing to look for, is more developers.
Ideally, if you're in Zurich or in the area, because it's great to have all the remote work, but we also try to bundle it a little bit at least. So there's a focus on Zurich, potentially also San Francisco, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, we think that there's going to be natural clusters of collaborators across these projects, and so I think it's my philosophy at this stage is like, we're going to embrace remote first as a default, if you will, because we're digitally distributed teams and collaborators and ecosystem, but there's so much value to being in person. And so how do we kind of have some intention around where those geographic clusters are? Zurich being one of those clusters, California being one of those clusters, New Zealand being one of those clusters, and we'll see what else emerges. But those are some of the areas where we have networks, as well as Costa Rica, and kind of see how things continue to develop. But ultimately, this is about relationships and talent, and right fit, and so developers, as well as product oriented people of different roles, who are specifically kind of captivated by if you're still watching at this point, you have some patience at least. So if you're interested in this, we'd love to chat, especially also if you have Web3 experience, blockchain experience on the technical side, just experience with security and smart contracts, and kind of different aspects of the different token standards and so forth that we're referring to. That would be helpful pre-existing knowledge. And we also have a bit of a landing page up. Do you want to mention that?
Yes, but I'm actually not completely sure if I know the domain. It's ecocerts.com. Okay.
Simple. We'll redirect the other URLs there, but there's a little sign-up list, just to like be on a mailing list, so that as there's updates, you can receive those. And then there's a little contact form if you're interested in partnerships, integrations, collaborations, and so forth, that goes to our new mutual friend and collaborator, Hans, who's going to be helping us run point on kind of some of that partner pipeline.
Yeah, exciting times.
Yeah, super exciting. It's fun to like just, yeah, I guess be transparent about the build process. It's obviously very early days. And yeah, was there anything else you wanted to share in this format, and any other final reflections from you, Hoka?
I mean, I think the process of how we develop this project, and I think it is, I mean, in right relationship with the projects that are supposed to use this, and where we actually like see the impact on the ground, but also then with like having in mind that it also needs to work for the funders, for the top down. So it's like, how do we balance that, and how do we then also take the insights from like all the collaborators in the space? How do we really make it interoperable? How do we not just create another solution, but how do we create and nourish kind of the ecosystem and be part of that? I think for that, I think anybody who has like ideas on that, want to give feedback, who has where like our conversation potentially sparked some thoughts and comments. Also, please reach out with any comments that anybody has. If we are not looking at something that we should be looking at, please let us know.
Yeah, well said. Well, thank you, Hoka Bräumer. Thank you for watching. And yeah, as Hoka said, leave comments below, as well as reach out directly. Learn more at ecocerts.com, hypercerts.org, maearth.com. Subscribe to the channel for more updates, maearth.com/grants for the grants round 2. Yeah, we're going to continue to be publishing different formats of conversations, of videos, and so forth. So the interview series will continue to be a heartbeat and an anchor to this channel, but also, yeah, doing our best to experiment with really just being transparent and learning in public. We'd love to hear your feedback and any ideas and suggestions along the way. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.